Hello, welcome to lesson 2 of chapter 22, which is when Jesus commissioned Peter to feed his sheep. Let's find out what that meant. But first, your 3-sentence warm-up is describe what you learned about the Apostle Thomas in yesterday's video. I felt the Apostle Thomas's story is so very beautiful and worthy of inspiration for all of us. So go ahead and pause the video, write only 3 sentences, and then replay it. Okay, so can you think of a time that you felt really bad about doing something wrong, but then someone helped you feel better? How does that feel? When somebody says, I forgive you, or it's okay, and they really mean it from the heart, what does that do to you? And what does that do to this chain that we just drag around when we know we've done something wrong? This chain can be bigger or smaller. You know, if we just know we maybe said something that wasn't that kind, that's kind of a little bit of guilt. But if we know we really yelled and we're really awful to somebody, that can be a lot of guilt, and it can really affect us as we carry it around. In this topic, today's whole lesson is about Peter, who will remember the kind of guilt he carried around after the Passion of Christ. But let's review a little bit about what we knew about Peter during his 3 years following the Lord through his public ministry. His name was Simon, right? He was born Simon. His dad was named John. He's an ordinary fisherman. But Jesus called him to follow him. And Jesus would ultimately reveal to Simon that he had a different destiny for him. Let's watch that moment happen.
And who do you say that I am?
I see you are the Messiah. The Son of the living God.
In saying that, Simon Bar-Jonah, you show yourself to be blessed among men. Flesh and blood have not revealed this truth to you. It has come from my Father in heaven. And so now I will call you Peter, the rock.
Upon which he would build his church, the actual Bible says. From then on, Jesus called Simon Peter, which was Greek for rock. He literally called him rock. Imagine that if I just started calling you rock. I mean, hey, rock. You know, it would start to, every time you hear it, it'd sound a little funny. And Jesus wanted it to sound funny because he wanted Peter to constantly remember that he was created to be a rock that Jesus would use to build the temple of God's eternal people, the Catholic Church. And Peter had that destiny. And as he was growing in what he would come to realize that meant, Jesus all of a sudden was arrested, beaten, condemned. And in that night when Jesus was being mistreated, Peter panicked, and in his fear, he denied Jesus 3 times. For the rest of Good Friday, when Jesus was on the cross and laid in the tomb, Peter was crying out of shame. Even after being consoled on Holy Saturday, there was still a little bit of sorrow in Peter's heart. He had denied the Lord, whom, the Lord had trusted him. The Lord had called him the rock, and and Peter had denied him. He let him down. After the resurrection, Jesus kept appearing to the apostles, but even after that, Peter, he couldn't shake that little bit of guilt about what he had done wrong. And then Jesus offered Peter lasting redemption, because as Peter had denied him 3 times, Jesus gave Peter the chance to show him his love 3 times before he sent him out to be the Pope. Let's watch a video that shows Jesus redeeming Peter in that way.
Cast the net on the right side of the ship, and you shall find. It is the Lord. Bring up the fish which you have now caught.
So bad.
Come
all the way through.
and dine.
And now Peter, when they get there, Jesus had a whole breakfast for them ready.
Simon, son of Jonas, lovest thou me more than these?
You love me.
Yea, Lord, thou knowest that I love thee.
Feed my lambs. Simon, son of Jonas, lovest thou me?
Do you love me?
Yea, Lord, thou knowest that I love thee.
Feed my sheep. Simon, son of Jonas, lovest thou me?
Lord, thou knowest all things. Thou knowest that I love thee.
Feed my sheep. Verily, verily, I say unto thee, when thou wast young.
With that, Peter's denial was completely erased. Jesus had given him the chance to say, I love you 3 times, and Peter had erased his sin. And he was asked to go and feed the sheep. So the question for you first is, how did Jesus give Peter the chance to redeem himself after his triple denial? Answer that, replay it. So with being restored, Jesus gave Peter the commission, the job, to feed his lambs, to tend his sheep, and to feed his sheep. Peter had been just a fisherman, but from then on, Jesus had given him the new role to become, finally, the rock upon which the church would be built. These are the sheep of Christ, all the people of the world, so many lost sheep, and Peter got right to work to go find them. He went all throughout the Jerusalem preaching, and then he especially went to a city called Antioch to preach. And then he went to Rome, and he evangelized the city of Rome. Peter was understood by the apostles. He had always been the leader of the apostles, and he continued to have that role in the Bible. So all the apostles turned to him to speak, to help them settle disagreements, because Peter was made their leader. And so as the apostles started all these churches throughout the ancient world, Peter was the leader of all of those churches. When Peter died, it was understood by those churches that the person who would take Peter's place would take his role over of leading the church. And so here's Peter sitting on his chair. When that chair was empty, the office, the job of Pope would continue. So question 2 will be, what did Peter do to tend Jesus's sheep? He went preaching and he led the church. Okay, he went preaching and he led the church. Answer that and then replay this, okay? Excuse me. So, Peter fed the lambs. How did he feed the lambs? He, first of all, was given this gift to teach the faith without error. Peter humbly taught what Jesus had given to him and the apostles to the church. He didn't mix in his own ideas. He was faithful to what Jesus taught, and he did that without error, and the Holy Spirit helped him to make sure he didn't make any mistakes. He was the leader of all 12 apostles, and then he was the leader of the entire church as the apostles built these little churches all over the world. His leadership kept the whole church unified. Without a single leader, each diocese would have had its own leader, and no one would have kept the church unified. These jobs are the jobs of the Pope today. The Pope to this day still has the job to teach the faith without error. The Pope today still has the job of being the leader of the whole church, and he still keeps the church unified by being its leader. This is a really cool picture of all 266, I think, popes. Might have that wrong. But all these popes have carried on the mission of Peter, that to feed and tend the sheep in that way. Some little facts about the papacy. The Pope has the charism or gift of infallibility, which means he can't make a mistake if he's speaking ex cathedra. So it's kind of, if the Pope says, I am speaking ex cathedra, which means I'm speaking from the chair of Peter, it is understood that the Holy Spirit will make sure he does not make a mistake in what he says next. A student asked me earlier in the year, what if the Pope said, ex cathedra, the Detroit Pistons are the best basketball team in the world? Well, the Holy Spirit would stop him from saying that. So if he was saying ex cathedra and then he was going to say something really foolish, like the Pistons are the best team ever, his mouth would just stop working. The Holy Spirit would not allow him to say any error ex cathedra. Popes have only spoken ex cathedra, I believe, only 2 times. So it's extremely rare that a pope would ever do that. But if a pope were to do that, we as a church have the peace of knowing that whatever he says is absolutely true. The Holy Spirit will not lead us into error. The pope is still the leader of the entire church to this day, and the pope still is the sign of unity for the entire church. And our current pope is, of course, Pope Francis. He unifies us, he leads us, and he guides us. Throughout history, the papacy, or this just means, the office of the Pope, it's changed in certain ways on what it emphasizes. In the early church, the Pope was just basically like a bishop. He didn't really act much different than other bishops. Later, the Pope would start to show the greatness of his office by dressing in a royal way, wearing a crown and having a giant throne. Pope John Paul II, he expressed the papacy by visiting hundreds of countries and being with his church throughout the whole world. And then Pope Francis really emphasizes what it means to be a pope by trying to care for the poor and the people that are often forgotten. All 4 of these are great ways to show what the Pope is all about, because every one of these show these 4 things. The Pope is first and foremost a defender of the Catholic faith. He is supposed to guard the Catholic faith and not let it fall into any errors. His job isn't really to come up with new stuff, it's to defend what Jesus taught in the beginning and make sure it doesn't get messed up. So he's a defender of the church. The Pope is also a father. That's what Pope actually means. In Italian, it's not Pope, it's Papa. And Papa just means Papa, it means dad. So the Pope is a father to us, and we should always look to him as our father on this world. He is also a good shepherd, guiding the sheep, guiding them away from bad grass and over to good grass. And finally, the Pope is a fisherman. He's out to fish for souls and bring them to Jesus. Save them from the sea of darkness, save souls from sin, and bring them to Christ and salvation. Each one of these popes show those four things in their own unique way. And every pope will continue to show what it means to be the pope in their own way, but they'll all remain faithful to these four things by the grace of God. All right, question 20. So please describe those four things. So what are the four things that popes are supposed to do? And just rewatch the video if you missed it. Those four pictures, defender of the faith. Well, go rewatch it. Just rewind if you need to see. What are the four things that popes are supposed to do? That's actually all that I have for you for today. So God bless you. Reach out if you have any questions. Talk to you later. Bye.